Hello again. I'm E.E. Byrnes, and this is the prequel novella, the first of the prequel series, The Journeys Begin, to Jenelyn's Journey. And this is the story of her 3 times great-grandmother during the Civil War and how the journey began. I'm going to read you the first chapter. Thank you. September 1st, 1864, Atlanta, Georgia, United States. Chapter 1. The city has been surrendered, Papa said, his voice as grim as his somber eyes. General Sherman and his blasted Union Army have finally forced John Bell's hand. The wooden chair at the dining table scraped across the floor as he sat. The screech it made rattled my nerves and made the hair rise across my arms. The delicious smell of breakfast disappeared, and the warm food in my belly became a cold, hard lump. The Union Army had arrived in July, and our brave soldiers had been trying to fight them off since. But through August, we had watched them grow increasingly tired, the weight of battle and sacrifice of food finally taking its toll on them. I could understand that our Lieutenant General, John Bell Hood, who had fought in Antietam and Gettysburg, must have felt he had no choice but to save his dying men. "We need to leave," Mama said. Her gaze was sharp and focused, but panic lined her eyes, and she took deep, controlled breaths. My Mama was a strong woman. There weren't many things that could make her worry, much less panic. She had survived starvation as a young girl, walked alone on foot through the backwoods of Kentucky with nothing but a cow for company, and traveled to Atlanta where she found factory work to survive. This desperate childhood had fortified her courage to be the rock she had leaned upon during the past 3 years of civil war. It had prepared her to deal with hardship, fear, and desperation, which were all factors that this awful war had brought upon us. Until now, I had never heard her warm, mild voice sound panicked. "This is our home," Papa growled, his teeth clipping his words as he shot a fierce look at her. "I'll be damned if I let those Yanks push us out of it." His determined words made me glance involuntarily at the 3 golden stars embroidered in the collar of his gray uniform jacket, along with the sleeve insignia of what looked to be a golden crown. Both identified him as a Confederate colonel, and Papa wore them with almighty pride. He hadn't reached his high rank due to cowardice. Rebellion lay strong within him, and he wasn't one to retreat from confrontation. Mama laid a gentle hand on Papa's arm, and her soothing touch calmed the flame that ignited his fury. "The girls, Clarence," she said softly. "We must think of them first. I love our home, but I love our family more." Papa's nostrils flared with stubborn indignation, but Mama's logic was hard to argue with. He looked over at me as I stared at him, and the hard light in his eyes dimmed to a soft glow. The fight in him deflated, and I watched as his weathered face grew heavy until every age line deepened, making him look 10 years older. It made me suddenly realize just how tired the war had made him. "You're right," he said hopelessly. "Our family must come first." Mama smiled at him gratefully, gave him a light kiss, and then picked up my little sister Leela and left the room. Her lips were tight, her eyes were hard, and her face was a frozen mask of determination. Even though my sister was only 4 years old, she knew better than to protest when Mama was like this. I needed to help Mama. Standing up, I glanced around the elegant dining room, trying to think of a way to help without asking. I'm 16 years old, and old enough to figure out what to do. But panic had slithered its way into my head, freezing all coherent and rational thoughts. I imagined the soldiers breaking down our door, ransacking every room, and arresting Papa, leaving us abandoned and vulnerable to the Union Army. These frightening thoughts were interrupted by large fingers tightening on my shoulder, and I looked round as Papa smiled at me. "Aura, go find your Mama," he said, his eyes warm with understanding. "Tell her I'll be getting the carriage ready." I nodded woodenly as my heart thundered against my chest. I had relied on Mama's strength and wisdom my whole life. Much as she leaned on her rock of courage, I leaned on her. Part of me wanted to prove that I could be like her, while another part knew I still desperately needed her. "Mama!" I cried out, and my voice rang through the long front hall. I mindlessly exited the dining room and searched the drawing room across from it, fear erasing all logical thoughts about where she might be. I simply searched without thinking, my brain frozen in terror. My footsteps were soundless on the thick carpeted floors as I raced down the hall. As I searched the rooms for Mama, my heart squeezed painfully at the realization that I would never see our house again. At worst, the Northerners would burn it to the ground as they raided the city. At best, it would become one of their homes. How dare they, I growled, anger fueling my adrenaline and extinguishing my fear. These Yankee bastards think they can just march into our city and demand we change our way of life. Papa had always made decent money as a Southern politician. When the war started, he became a Confederate colonel. Thanks to him, we lived in a nice, comfortable house. It wasn't like the grand plantation homes nestled outside the city amidst their acres of cotton fields, but it had everything one could ask for, plenty of space, lush furnishings, and solidly built, only for all of it to be taken away. I searched the bedrooms upstairs, but they were empty. My fingers subconsciously gripped my dress as I descended the stairs. Confusion and worry replaced my rage, scattering my thoughts to find answers. Where on earth were Mama and Leah? Leela, the house was unnervingly quiet. I didn't see any of the house slaves either, even Phoebe, our main slave who had been with us since I was born. She was usually always near to lend assistance in some way. Mama must have already told them to leave. But why wasn't she around then? My heart started beating so hard that I leaned against a wall to loosen my corset. Logic and emotion went to battle in my head, and I closed my eyes to try to quiet them. Once I stilled my thoughts, I could hear the house around me. The wind blew through the fireplaces, and the wooden walls creaked as they settled. Though it was eerily quiet, I was calm enough to think rationally for the first time. Mama dismissed the slaves. That meant she would have had to go to their quarters. Although, I reminded myself, they aren't really our slaves anymore. Lincoln had released them a year earlier with his Emancipation Proclamation. Fortunately, Mama and Papa had always been good masters, never whipping in discipline or depriving food. Many of our slaves had stayed with us through loyalty, and because they had nowhere else to go. Although Papa could be stricter with them, Mama had always preferred to treat them as hired staff, rather than people we owned. We had lost a few due to the proclamation, but not as many as some households. I arrived in the empty kitchen. The stairs in there led to the slaves' quarters, but I didn't need to go down them. I instinctively knew there was no one down there. I turned around and saw the open back door that led to the yard. The gentle breeze was swinging it slowly with a soft creak. Mama, I whispered. I charged through the door. I nearly fell over my heavy skirts as I rushed down the porch steps. I could see Mama at the back of the yard, her dress blowing from the mild summer breeze that fanned the flames of the fires the Northerners were setting a few streets from us. Neighboring rooftops were engulfed, the fire's roars swallowing the distant cries of those who had chosen to rebel. Leela clutched fiercely onto Mama. Her little legs were wrapped tightly around Mama's middle. Tear tracks stained her chubby cheeks and her eyes were red from crying. Her small knuckles were white as they gripped Mama's dress. Seeing Leela's terror made me want to cry. Mama, Sissy, I cried, clutching Mama's free arm that wasn't holding Leela. I wished for a moment that she could carry me too. I was so worried. Listen, Mama murmured. You can already hear the screaming. She was right. Now that I was next to my rock, I settled again, confident that I could face any challenges. Soldiers were evicting anyone who resisted them, and considering the Confederate pride within us, that would be most people. However, Mama was smart. She knew there was no point in resisting. Papa told me to tell you that he's getting the carriage ready, I said, happy to finally relay his message. Mama looked at me. Her deep brown eyes were hard, and her lips were pressed so tight I could hardly see them. That's good, she said. The servants can help him. Mama had been good about calling them servants once they'd been officially freed. I knew she appreciated the ones who had stayed. So you didn't dismiss them? I asked. No, she said mildly, her grip tightening on Leela. I'm back here because soldiers will be in front of the house if they're nearby. Leela started crying and I didn't want to attract their attention. They won't be able to hear her from back here. At the mention of her name, Leela managed to raise her head from Mama's shoulder, her tiny voice so soft we strained to hear it. I'll be quiet, she whispered. Her brown eyes were round with fear, but she was calmer now. Her grip had loosened and her tears had finally dried. Mama gave a small grin and a brisk nod. All right then, she said firmly. If you girls can be quiet, we'll go upstairs and grab what clothing we can. Nothing further was said as we made our way quietly upstairs. I strained to hear any confrontation at the front. Papa would have told the slaves to have the horse and carriage ready for him, so I didn't understand why he had to be with them. The slaves were more than capable. As we packed what little clothing we could fit into 2 pieces of luggage, Mama's strained face grew heavier. I knew it couldn't last, she muttered suddenly, causing Leela and I to look at her in surprise. I've had it too good for too long now. It'll be fine, Mama, I assured her and tried to sound confident. It has nothing to do with how good we have it. The Northerners just won't understand our way of life. Mama scoffed a little under her breath and cocked an eyebrow at me. She didn't say anything, but her face softened as she studied me. After a few uncomfortable moments, she spoke, her voice more solemn than I had ever heard before. We're going to leave the city for the North. If something happens, take care of your sister. Nothing will happen, I argued, as fear crept up my chest again. I said, if. We must be prepared for anything. We picked up the 2 luggage cases and left the larger trunks we couldn't carry. Leela had to walk behind us, clinging to Mama's dress pleats. Must we go north? I asked. I can't imagine having to deal with a Yankee personally. Mama gave a low chuckle before nodding wistfully. We descended the stairs and stood in our wide front hall. Mama glanced around us at the golden-framed paintings, heavy velvet curtains hanging on the front windows, and the rose-filled porcelain vase sitting on the hall table. There's no help for it, she sighed. It's our best chance for safety. But I will miss our home dearly. I've had a good life in these rooms. Pearls of tears started to well at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked and took a deep breath. No use crying over it, she said, her voice quivering. I found a new life before, and I can do it again. Leela and I glanced at each other, both of us worried over how concerned Mama was. We had never seen her nearly in tears before. Aura, take your sister's hand. Phoebe can carry your other luggage, she ordered firmly. Where is she? I did as she said, and to my relief, so did Leela. I never knew if she would argue or not, but today the fear and chaos around the house had subdued her into obedience. I'm right here, ma'am, Phoebe said, her wide-hipped frame appearing as if by magic beside us. I wondered briefly where she had been. It was unusual for us to be in the house without Phoebe around somewhere. She quickly saw my confused expression at her appearance and smiled warmly. Her caramel eyes welled up as she looked at me. I was out helping your papa, she explained hurriedly. Now no time to be wasting, girl. We have to get yous all out. We followed Mama out the front door, leaving a luggage case waiting on the front porch for Phoebe to carry behind us. I blinked against the bright sun. The weather was unaware of the day's tragedy. It was humid, hot, and filled with the scent of magnolias. Papa's grey uniform jacket was already soaked with sweat from the dense humidity as he tightened the final strap on the horse's harness. We're ready, he said, nearly breathless from anxiety and exertion. Girls, get into the carriage. I lifted my skirts, climbed into the back, and turned to lift Leela. We never hesitated when Papa gave a direct order. I watched in subdued silence as Mama and Papa said goodbye to the slaves, standing in a neat row together. They all seemed somber, and some even looked scared. I could easily imagine why. We were the only home they had ever known. Phoebe, Kitch, Tandy, Haney, names of people I had known for most of my life and as familiar to me as my own parents. Phoebe particularly, since she had helped raise me. Though they were free, they didn't have anywhere to go or anyone to take care of them. I worried for their safety along with ours. I tended to have Papa's habit of still calling them slaves, but I thought of them the same as Mama. They were helpful servants who I respected and couldn't imagine living without. Who would take care of them now? Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.